Apply for the wrong exam. Make sure you apply for the right exam. PMP, Project Management Professional. Right? Now, you may receive notice that you're being audited. Now, audit process is just very random. Just 1 in 10 applications generally, right, will get audited. And really, if it's an audit process, they just want you to verify everything that you've put down on your application. Right? And it's just a random audit. Most of the time, it's just a signature that they need, right? Just your manager's signature or somebody familiar with the work that you did, on the particular projects that you've listed. Okay, as long as they just need to agree and sign off, as long as they got their signature. Now, once you have sent your application, then PMI are generally going to take 5 business days, right? 1 full week to review your application. Once they have approved your application, then you pay for the exam. You don't pay for the exam beforehand. You pay once they've approved. Once you've paid for the exam, then you get your, they give you what's known as an eligibility ID. Right now you can go and actually take the test, and then you go to the Pearson VUE website to actually schedule your test. And you can schedule it either as an online proctored exam, or you can schedule it at the Pearson VUE Testing Center. Right? Now, there's pros and cons of each one. Our training videos goes through all of the details, the pros and cons of taking it at the testing center or the online proctored exam. And on the day of the exam, you will receive your results immediately. Because it's a computer-based exam, you will get your results immediately. Okay? All right, so let's talk about the actual exam itself then. Right? All right, so the actual PMP exam itself, as I mentioned, it's a computer-based exam. However, it's only a pass or fail exam. No scores are given, right? There are no scores on the actual PMP exam. It's just pass or fail. Right? You have 180 random multiple choice questions. All questions are basically multiple choice, right? 180 questions, right? 180 multiple choice questions. And you have 3 hours and 50 minutes. That's about 230 minutes, right? So 180 questions to do in 230 minutes basically gives you 1 minute and 16 seconds per question, 76 seconds per question. Not a lot of time, right? There are not a lot of time, right? In answering the questions, you can see that, right? Now, some questions you'll be able to answer in just a few seconds. Some questions will take a little bit longer. But 76 seconds per question on average, right? So time management is absolutely vital on an exam like this, right? All right, now, the way the exam is broken up, right? It's broken up into 3 sections of 60 questions each. And they're all random. That's one of the key things I also want to mention, right? The next question can come from any area of the syllabus. It's not adaptive, as in, how some exams are. The next question is based on how you answered the current question, right? So the question is dependent on your previous questions. None of that, right? This is purely and simply random. The next question could be a predictive question, could be an agile question, could be a question on cost, it could be a question on risk, right? It could be a question on absolutely anything, right? Now, but they've broken it up into 3 60 question segments, right? So when you log in, you only have access to the first set of 60 questions, right? During that time, you can go back and forth however you want to. You submit those 60 questions, then you get the next 60 questions. Once you've submitted the first set of 60 questions, you have no access to those questions again. Those questions are done, right? Now, you have a choice. You can either take a 10-minute break after that. Once you've submitted the 60 question, you can either take a 10-minute break, and it's optional. You can take a 10-minute break. You can just take a couple of minutes. You don't have to take the full 10 minutes. Okay? However, it's a 10-minute break. It's not an 11-minute break, right? If you're not back within 10 minutes, they will fail your exam. Okay? Be cognizant of that. Now, the exam itself then, although it's completely random, 180 random questions, it's random based on these parameters here. So the way the PMP syllabus is, right, they've broken it down into 3 domains, right? You have 3 domains. You have the process domain, the people domain, business environment domain, right? So the process domain is 50% of the exam. The people domain is 42% of the exam. Business environment domain is 8% of the exam. And so within there, approximately half the exam is predictive. And predictive refers to your traditional style of project management, right, where you plan your project at the beginning, right, then you execute according to the plan, and then you finally deliver the product the one time at the end. That's your traditional predictive style of project management. Half the exam is based on those kind of methodologies, and then, or those kind of principles. Then the other half is agile and hybrid. And agile is a very, very different approach to project management. And we're going to talk about both of them as we go through this class. Okay. All right. Now, one question actually that a lot of people have is, what is a pass mark? There is no set pass mark for the PMP exam. And the reason is because every exam is different, right? And PMI constantly updating the exam data bank. Every exam is different, right? So questions are weighted. If you get a real tough exam, for example, your pass mark might be a lot lower than if you get a much easier exam, right? So the exam pass mark can vary. So the general pointer that we usually give is when you are taking practice exams, then you should be aiming to be in the upper 70, 80%. Then you know you're ready for the real exam. Okay? Now, the type of questions you're going to get on the exam, right? You're going to get scenario, situational type of questions. Expect to get a lot of these kind of questions. A lot of scenario, situational type of questions, right? A lot of questions, along with that, extraneous information, right? So you will get some, they'll give you a scenario, but then within that scenario, there'll be some irrelevant information in there, information that's not needed, but it might be there that might throw you off, right? More than one feasible option, right? So typically, most of the questions, multiple choice, 4 option choices. Only one of those option choices are correct. However, when you're looking at the options, they all look good, right? Or 3 of those option choices look as good as one another. Well, there's only one correct answer. You need to learn to pick out the best option. Right? So these are little nuances, little tips and pointers, little tips and tricks that you need to practice. Right? And again, I'm going to be covering some of these as we go through the class. But then there are some new style of questions. More than one correct answer. Right? So they may say choose 2. So you may have 4 options, or 5, or 6, or 7, right? Maybe even 8. And they'll say choose 2 of them, choose 3 of them, right? And so you have to choose 2 options, choose 3 options. You may get some drag and drop. So they'll give definition on one side, terminology on the other. You have to match the definition with the terminology. So these are a couple of new style of questions. True, false type questions, hotspot questions, right? So these are, again, new style of questions where they'll give you a chart or a graph, and they'll just basically ask you some questions based on that chart or graph. Right? Now, with these new style of questions, you're not going to get too many of those. I mean, a good 90-95% of questions are going to be the traditional, right? There's 4 option choices. Only one of them is correct. Okay. Now, just give you some basic tips and pointers right now. The first pointer I want to give, first tip, read the very last sentence first. Don't read the scenario first. Read the last sentence first, right? That last sentence is the question, right? So read that last sentence first. And then once you're focused on the question, now you look at the option choices. Sometimes you can answer the question or, just based on reading the last sentence. Some, the option choice will just pop out. But obviously, the scenario, sometimes, a lot of times you have to read the scenario, but at least your focus is on the question. So now when you go back and read the scenario, now it's a lot easier to pick out keywords and phrases and distractors and so on and so forth. So with that, then, you need to learn to pick out keywords and phrases and distractors, irrelevant information. Along with that, as you are going through as you are reading the last sentence, look out for these kind of keywords. Not, next, least likely. What's the next thing that you should do? What should you do first? What's the best thing? Or what should you not do? You miss out the word not in a question. That's completely changed the context of the question. Right? And it's very easy to do, very easy to miss out these little key words. So always watch out for those kind of, or pay special attention, right, for those kind of words. Right? And sometimes you'll get option choices, looking at the option choices, they all look good, but then only one of them is even addressing the question, right? The other ones might be correct statements, but they're not even addressing the question. So again, always watch out for those kind of questions. Okay? Now, a couple of assumptions that you can make, and this is always unless the question states otherwise, right? Unless the question states otherwise, right? Project managers, they're always proactive, right? They're always proactive, always taking some kind of action. So in other words, proactive options are always better than reactive options, right? So for example, if you have an option choice, there's something like, if this machine breaks down, we'll replace it. That's going to be the wrong option, right? That is a reactive approach. If you've identified that this machine might be breaking down, you've identified that, say, one of the parts of the machine is wearing down, and that's going to cause the machine to break down, well, you're going to replace that part right now, right? That is a proactive approach, right? The reactive approach will be, well, if it breaks down, we'll figure it out. We'll replace it then, right? So that's always going to be the wrong option. So you always take the proactive rather than the reactive, right? Another assumption, adequate documentation. PMI, a real stickler for documentation. Everything needs to be documented, right? So an assumption is we're always documenting. Along with this, historical information, prior projects, right? We have access to the historical information from prior projects. Again, always make that assumption. These assumptions are not always there in reality, right? Depending on the size and nature of the project and the organization, sometimes prior documentation is not always there, right? But for the exam, always assume it is, right? Change control is in place, so you always have a proper change control process, and we're actually following those change control procedures. Again, always make that assumption, right? Now, generally, if you're looking at the option choices, a negative tone usually signifies an incorrect option, right? So, for example, one option choice is kind of like finger pointing towards another group or another team member, or, then that's going to be the wrong option, right? So, if it gives some kind of negative tone to it, right, then generally an incorrect. Always focus on collaboration. When we're talking about stakeholders, when we're talking about team members, we always want to collaborate, always want to work together, engagement. These are the kind of scenarios they're looking for on the exam. Engagement, collaboration, working together, right? Team building, right? These are all going to be kind of like the basic themes of project management. Okay. All right, questions then. All right, so I've got 2 questions on here. And the Q&A. Again, if you do have any questions, make sure you use the Q&A and not the group chat. If you have any questions for me, if you put them on the group chat, please transfer them to the Q&A. So a question here from SS. Now, we don't know who, we can't see anybody's names here. It's just your initials. It says, even with CAMP, I'm assuming you mean CAPM, CAPM, do we still require past PM experience? I don't believe you need it for the CAPM. Right, for the CAPM exam, right, the past project experience is not required. I mean, that's one of the reasons why they have the CAPM exam. With the PMP, you need to have 3 years of experience if you have a bachelor's degree, 5 years if you don't. But with the CAPM, the whole idea is you don't have any experience. And so, as long as you got some training, I think you need either 23 hours of training, right? As in, a PMP class or project management class or some kind of leadership class, then you're good. Now, will you be sharing these slides at the end of the training? I personally won't be, but I believe you can download them, and they will be. You will get access to the training videos as well, right? As in the recording of this. Recording of this, you will get access to that. Now, CAPM, I know they're kind of like changing, or they have changed it or they are changing it. So the actual latest requirements, I'm not 100% sure. So you may want to just double check on the PMI website. Okay. All right. All right. So I'm not seeing any additional questions on here. And again, if you do pull up some questions, then I will answer them accordingly. Okay. All right, so let's move on to the next section here. We have a lot to get through, right? We have a lot of information to get through in this class. Right? All right, so let's go through this next section, which is the foundation section. Right? Now, in this section, the foundation is just basically Actually, before I do that, there's a couple of new questions that just came up. So bachelor's degree, CAPM, and video training is enough for the PMP exam. Yeah, so if you have the CAPM exam, right, and so you got your bachelor's, you got your CAPM exam, so you've got your 3 years of experience, 3 years of project management training, and our 35 hours of video training. Yes, that will be enough to pass the exam. That will be enough to take the exam and pass the exam. Yes, it is. Right. Another question here from EM. Does the PMP certification video attached in the resource list, is it available for the training hours? If not, yeah, it is. Right. I don't know about it being free and available, right? But the full 35-hour PMP video training, right, the link that you have, right, that will count for the full 35 hours. Absolutely, it will. Right? And actually, our video training plus the quizzes that we have and the exam practice exams, right? Then that will be that is more than enough to pass the exam. And a lot of people have passed the exam just by watching those videos. All right, so question here. I have 15 plus years of experience as an individual contributor. Can I go for PMP to become a project manager? Yes, you should do, right? I'm not going to talk about the actual application. If I have time tomorrow, then I may just go a little bit more into the application. Our video training just go into it a little bit more. But as long as you have been in some kind of lead capacity, as in you've been leading people, leading parts of projects, leading activities, right, then that usually counts, as long as you've been in some kind of lead capacity, right? You don't have to be a project manager per se, but you have to be in some kind of lead, okay? All right, so let's move on to this next section then, the foundation stuff. And the foundation stuff is just basically just some definitions and terminology, right? Just some basic definitions and terminology, kind of like the ABCs of project management. However, I do have a little, another little question for you guys, another little poll, right? What industry do you work in? I'm just interested to know what industry everybody works in, right? So again, if you don't mind, just, whichever is the closest industry. I mean, obviously this isn't an exhaustive list by any means, right? But whatever is the closest industry out of this, if none of them fit, right, then just choose other down at the bottom. And the industry that you work in, not necessarily, basically, it is your industry. So which field of work you're working in, right? So I'll just give you, right? So that is PMI's exact definition then of a project. Temporary endeavor undertaken to create a unique product, service, or result. Now, when you start a project, right, do you know everything there is to know about that project right at the beginning? Do you know every single little activity that needs to be performed? Do you know down to the granular level exactly how much this project is going to cost and exactly what date it's going to finish? No, you don't know that, right? You're going to start off with a high-level concept of the project. Then you're going to start doing some analysis, some research, right? You're going to come up with a high-level plan, then a more detailed plan, right? You're going to come up with high-level activities, drill down into more of the detailed activities, right? You're going to come up with a high-level budget, high-level timeline, then drill down into more of the details as you go through the class, right? That is progressive elaboration. That is a term called progressive elaboration, right? Where project plans are constantly progressively elaborated. That's what that term is. Now, another term which is a type of progressive elaboration, is this term called rolling wave planning, right? So rolling wave planning then is basically planning near-term activities in detail, longer term at a much more high level, right? Near-term activities in detail, longer term at a much more high level, right? So for example, if it's a 2-year-long project, right? You're not going to be planning every single little activity for the whole 2 years right now, right? No, we don't know what's going to happen in 6 months' time, let alone 2 years' time. So we're going to plan the first phase in a lot of detail. Then halfway through the first phase, we'll start planning the second phase. Halfway through that, we'll start planning the third phase, and so on and so forth, right? That is rolling wave planning. You're planning near-term activities in detail, longer term at a much more higher level, right? Regardless of what you call near-term, long-term to be. It could simply be days, weeks, months, quarters. It could be phases, like I mentioned. It could be iterations, right? Those of you in Agile, those iterations are known as sprints, right? You're going to be planning the first sprint in detail, or you're planning basically one sprint at a time in detail. That is rolling wave planning. So that's the definition of a project. Let's talk about definition of project management, right? And the project management then is the application of knowledge, skills, tools, and techniques to project activities to meet project requirements, right? All right, application of knowledge about the project management. And remember this term, progressive elaboration, is constantly being updated, right? And skills. What skills are we talking about, right? Right, well, project management skills. What kind of skills do you need to manage projects? Well, there's all these different interpersonal skills, soft skills, leadership skills, communication skills, negotiating skills, team building skills, and so on and so forth. Many, many skills that's required to manage a project, right? Now, the number one job skill for a project manager is always considered communication. That is why you hire a project manager, right? To communicate. Right? A project manager is somebody that can get things moving along, someone that can get teams working together. Is a project manager a technical expert for the purpose of the PMP exam? The answer is no. They're not a technical expert, right? They are a good communicator. In order to be a successful project manager, you need to be a good communicator. You need to be able to get teams working together. There's going to be conflicts. Project manager is somebody that can manage those conflicts, right? Basically to get your project moving along, get things done. Okay? Now, another quick question for you guys. Right, quick poll here. How many of you have Agile experience? Right? Just want to just give you I just want to have a quick understanding, right? Do you know anything about Agile? No. You have know a little bit, right? Just put a little, right? You've got some extensive experience, then obviously put down yes, right? So just want to have a quick understanding of where everyone is at, because we're going to talk about Agile now, right? Some of you I know will have no experience, no idea what Agile is. Right? In fact, some of you have got so much experience in Agile, you might not even know what predictive is, right? So we're going to talk about both of them. Now, while I do, there is one other question here from JP. Does PMI have a stance on the difference between program management and project management? Absolutely they do, right? In fact, PMI have a separate program management certification. It's called PGMP. Make sure you don't apply for that by mistake, right? This one is project management. They do actually have a program management certification, PGMP. They actually have a portfolio management certification, which is called PMFP, right? Now, the basic difference is a program is made up of many, I won't say many, but a program is made up of related projects, right? And your organization, your team, you're going to determine, and usually it's an organizational level, you're going to determine what we mean by related, but they have to be related in some way. That would be part of a program, right? Now, if any of you guys are applying for the PMP exam and you're a program manager, that's perfectly fine. Right? For you, your program will be your project, right? You don't need to list each of your projects out individually on your application. No, for you, that program, that is your project, okay? Because you're not managing those individual projects. You've got separate project managers to manage those, right? But what you're doing is you're managing that program, right? And so for you, that's your project. Okay, so just in case that's where you're going, but yeah, there is a difference, right? A program is just a group of related projects. Okay, but they don't go into programs too much, right? Because they have their own separate certification on that. All right, so let's give you a couple more seconds. So it looks like most of you have answered this. So let's see where everyone is at. Right, so it looks like quite a lot of you have Agile experience, right? And actually know a little bit about Agile. Which makes sense because a lot of you guys are in IT, right? And that's where we see Agile the most in the IT world, right? And quite a few of you, though, like a good, almost a third of you, right? Not quite a third, but almost a third of you, is between a quarter and a third, right? Have no idea what Agile is. All right, good. So we're going to talk about that. So on the next slide here, then, right, let's talk about the three types of development life cycles here. So you've got predictive, iterative, incremental, and agile. Now, don't try to memorize this table. I always say this: you don't need to memorize it, right? Then you just have a decent understanding. So predictive. Let's talk about predictive first. Predictive is your traditional style of project management, right? I mean, generally, when you think of project management, the stereotypical thought regarding project management, that's what you think of, predictive, right? Also known as traditional, also known as waterfall style of project management, where you have all these different phases, right? So you get your requirements at the beginning, right? So requirements are fixed. You get all of your requirements at the beginning, and then you execute, you plan your project, you execute your project, and then you deliver your project the one time at the end, right? Now, the best way I always like to think of, and in all my classes, I always give this as an example, is think of building a house, something that we can all relate to, right? Predictive project, you're building a house. You're knocking down your current house, building a new house. Well, you reach out to your architect, you get all of your plans and everything, and then your builder is going to build according to those plans, right? Now, what if you decide to change your plans halfway through? You can change it. It's going to cost you money. Do you have unlimited resources? Do you have an unlimited budget? Right? I'm going to guess as an individual, you're not going to have unlimited budget, right? And so your changes need to be constrained as much as possible, right? You need to have the minimum amount of changes because those changes are going to cost money, right? And so the whole idea of predictive is you're going to be managing costs, right? But it's a one-time delivery at the end, right? The builder is going to deliver that entire house the one time at the end, right? And that's a key regarding predictive. It's a one-time delivery right at the end of the project. At the other end of the scale, you've got the agile. Now, agile then, the whole idea of agile is requirements can constantly change. You're constantly changing requirements, and you're delivering value to your customer every couple of weeks, right? So every sprint, and each sprint is generally 1 to 4 weeks. For the PMP exam, 1 to 4 weeks. Frequent small delivery. Every couple of weeks, you're delivering something to the customer. Now, as the business environment changes, right, as the external or internal environment changes, right, then your requirements can change, right? You can update those requirements. Right? The whole idea behind Agile is you're only delivering high-value items to the customer, right? Now, not every industry is Agile going to work. Agile works best in what we call high-risk industry. Now, risk for the purpose of project management means uncertainty, high uncertainty. So in other words, a constantly changing environment, such as IT, change management, cell phone apps, right? This is where Agile works best, right? If requirements are going to be fixed, as in, building a house, right? You're working a dockyard, building a cruise liner, Agile is not going to work very well in those kind of projects, right? These kind of projects that could last, several months, several years, Agile might not work in those kind of projects, right? So Agile works best in a constantly changing business environment. Then you've got the iterative and incremental, and Agile uses the principles of iterative and incremental, right? And that basically means you've got different iterations. You're delivering value at various points. However, the basic difference is with iterative, requirements, again, can change in both iterative and incremental. The dynamic can change. But the difference is that iterative is one-time delivery at the end. One single delivery, right? But the work is constantly repeated, constantly repeated until you get it correct. And the best example I always like to give regarding iterative is, something we can all relate to now is think of developing a vaccine, right? So, when we can all relate to that, right? So, a couple of years back at the early stage of the pandemic, right, all these, pharmaceutical companies, Moderna, Pfizer, and all these companies, Johnson & Johnson, they were all kind of like, doing research on this vaccine, right? They're all trying to develop this vaccine. However, is it a fixed requirement? No, they don't know what the components of the vaccine is going to be, right? But they make a small tweak here, test, another small tweak here, test, right? Thousands and thousands of tests that they're doing. So they're repeating this work until you get the final product. It's constantly being repeated. But you have to get the final product, one vaccine at the end, right? You can't suddenly decide, we're going to deliver half a vaccine right now. Then we'll deliver the other half of the vaccine later. No, you have to deliver the entire vaccine, right? So that's an example of an iterative there, right? One single delivery. Incremental, on the other hand, is you're going to have smaller deliveries, right? Now, these frequent small deliveries are not the same thing as agile sprints. These frequent small deliveries might be several months long, right? So you're installing a computer system, right, with 10 different modules, right? But you're just installing one module at a time. And each module might be, say, 5, 6, 7 months long, right? So, you install the first module, then it goes live, then you install the next module, it goes live, right? But each module might be several months long, right, to install, right? So that would be kind of like an example of an incremental. Okay? Now, let's talk about Agile, right? Just a real quick Agile life cycle here. Again, for those of you that are not, and in fact, even those of you that are experiencing Agile, there are different Agile methodologies out there, right? And so the principles of PMI have chosen Scrum, right, to develop their principles. Now, PMI's principles on Agile is not Scrum. It's just that they have taken Scrum and created their own principles. Right? So many of these terms then are actually Scrum terms that you'll see as well. Right? All right, now, there's 3 basic roles, right, when it comes to Agile. You've got the product owner, the Agile team, and the team facilitator, right? The team facilitator, right, is the closest thing to a project manager, but they're not quite a project manager. They're the closest thing to a project manager. The team facilitator, the best way to think of them, or rather, those of you that are obviously familiar and working with Agile, Scrum Master, right? Sometimes the PMP exam, sometimes PMI uses the term Scrum Master, sometimes they don't. Most of the time they'll use this term team facilitator. Okay? You've got the product owner who represents the customer. They're the voice of the customer. And then you've got the Agile team themselves. And the Agile team themselves are a cross-functional team of developers, testers, business analysts, and whatever roles are required on the project. Okay. Now, at the beginning of the project, and I'm just going to go through a very, very high level life cycle here. Beginning of a project, the 3 roles get together. They get the requirements from the customer, right? And the product owner represents the customer, right? So the 3 roles, from the actual customer, they get the requirements. Those requirements are known as user stories, right? So this term here, user stories. 1 second. All right, so they're known as user stories. Now, the product owner then takes these user stories and they prioritize them. Prioritize those user stories, prioritize the requirements to create the product backlog. Okay? Now, for each sprint, the team, the Agile team, is going to take these high priority user stories, and that's what they're going to implement in each particular sprint. Right? Now, each sprint is 1 to 4 weeks. I know it says 2 to 4 weeks here, but generally for the PMI purposes, it's 1 to 4 weeks. It's a 1 to 4 week sprint. And during the sprint, they go through an entire mini life cycle, right? They've got the requirements, those user stories, right? Then they do the development, the design, the testing, and then you have a mini goal, right? So they're going, so each sprint, right, they're essentially going through all of the work, right, for those, just for those high priority backlog items. Now, each day, the team facilitator, right, hosts a daily stand-up meeting, no more than 10 to 15 minutes, daily stand-up meeting, right, which with each of the team members, right, and they're just basically addressing 3 questions. What did I accomplish yesterday? What am I working on today? Right? And what impediments are there? They're basically addressing these 3 questions. Right? So that's why it's a real quick and easy meeting. Any impediments that are there, right? Then they're taken offline, and the team facilitator then will work with the appropriate stakeholders and the team member to try and remove those impediments. All right. Now, at the end of the sprint, right? Now the team is going to deliver what they've, those user stories, they will deliver them to the product owner, right? They'll do a demo, they'll deliver to the product owner, and the product owner is going to accept it or reject it, right? Accept or reject those user stories, right? Now, at the end of the sprint then, or rather after the sprint review meeting, right, then you have a sprint retrospective, right? The team has a sprint retrospective, which is nothing more than a lessons learned meeting. That's really all. It's just lessons learned, right? And it serves as the sprint closeout meeting as well. Now, during this sprint, right, the product owner or anyone, right, they might have identified some new issues, some new requirements, right? Those new requirements then, they're created into user stories and just put into the product backlog. Everything is reprioritized. Right, at the end of the sprint, I said the product owner either approves the deliverable or rejects the deliverable. What if they reject any of these user stories? If they reject a user story, it goes back into the product backlog. Right? What if the team, they select a certain number of user stories and there's 1 or 2 requirements or user stories that didn't get implemented in the sprint? Again, it gets put back into the product backlog and everything is reprioritized, right, for a future sprint. So the team is, or rather the customer is getting high priority items. The team is only implementing high priority items. So if something is high priority, say a new user story comes in and that's high priority, that means something else is a lower priority, right? And so each sprint now, the team or the customer is basically getting value until the end of the project. Now, an agile project is known as a release. So by the end of the release, right, they've gotten they've basically gotten the system, the product, the system that they need, right? It's just that, when this value is going to be delivered, right, that can change. Okay? So anyway, that's the high-level basic life cycle regarding Agile. Now, let me talk about the manifesto, the Agile manifesto, very briefly. And this was developed when Agile first came about around in 2001. Right? So basically there was these 17 software developers that got together and they wanted to basically come out with a much better way of managing IT projects, right? Software projects. And they came up with the Agile Manifesto, which is made up of 4 paired values and 12 principles, right? 4 paired values and 12 principles, right? I'm just going to briefly talk about the 4 paired values. Well, we're not really going to cover the 12 principles in this class, right? But the 12 principles are an extension of these paired values, right? So 1 paired value, individual and interaction over processes and tools, right? So essentially anything that's bolded on the left-hand side takes priority to what's on the right-hand side. Individual and interaction over processes and tools. So what this is saying is that we want team members to be working together rather than just blindly following processes and tools, right? So obviously, they need to follow these processes and tools, but we want team members to be working together, right? We need collaboration, engagement, team building, right? That is what makes success. And the analogy I always like to give is think of a sports team. You may have the best players on your sports team. If they're not working together, they're not going to be a good team. Right? And we've seen many cases, many examples. You have a rookie team that's working together that can be a well-experienced team that's not working together, right? And so that's what we want in an Agile project. Individuals, interaction, rather than, processes, just blindly following procedure. Work in software over comprehensive documentation. Work in software takes priority over documenting. That doesn't mean we don't document. Absolutely, we document. But work in software takes priority, right? Customer collaboration over contract negotiation, right? Of course, we have to have a contract, right? But we should be focusing on collaborating with the customer, we're making sure the customer gets what they want, right? But our contract should allow for that. And then responding to change over following a plan. That's the whole idea of Agile. Respond to change. It's a constantly changing business environment. Okay? All right, now let me just talk about some of the roles, right? Some of the roles in a project, right? You've got stakeholders. Stakeholder is basically anybody that's impacted by the project. It's not just senior management. It's not just a customer. You're a stakeholder on the project, right? Because you're working on the project, and how you manage a project can determine success and failure. Your team are stakeholders on the project. You've got vendors supplying you with raw materials. If they delay shipment of raw materials, that can impact your project, right? They're a stakeholder in your project. Your project is impacting the general public. They would be stakeholders. End users, stakeholders on your project because they're utilizing your product. So any individual group or organization that is impacted positively or negatively, or could have a positive or negative influence, they would be considered a stakeholder. You've got the sponsor. Sponsor is providing funding for the project. I mean, they're a stakeholder as well, obviously. They're providing funding for the project, right? And then they're going to issue the project charter as well. Right? We're going to talk about the project charter in a little while. Right? Project team, everybody involved in the project. Project management team, also known as the leadership team, they're the key decision makers on the project. Then you've got the project manager on a traditional project. So these are predictive. On a traditional predictive project, project manager is what we call the command and control project manager. They are ultimately accountable for everything that goes on in the project, responsible for stakeholders, responsible for communication, right? They use their own expert judgment, right, to manage projects, right? Every project, like I said, is managed differently, and there's different situations that can impact your project. You come across a situation, a project manager needs to be able to figure out, all right, what do we do now? Right? They use their own expert judgment on that. Then you've got the functional manager, and the functional manager is just providing the team members. Right? Your team members might be coming from different areas of your organization. They're reporting to their functional manager. Right? Functional manager then is basically releasing those team members to work on your project. And then you've got the business analyst, right, who basically works on requirements. Right? Business analyst is all about requirements. Okay. All right, now then agile roles, a couple of the agile roles. So we already talked about these. You've got the team facilitator, the scrum master, right? Now the scrum master is not a true project manager. A scrum master, also known as a servant leader or team facilitator, they could use any of these three terms on the exam: team facilitator, scrum master, servant leader, right? And they're basically, they bring the team together. They collaborate with the team, right? They're making sure the team is collaborating with one another, right? Now, on an agile, at least for the purpose of the PMP exam, it's actually the team that makes the decisions. On a traditional project, the project manager is making day-to-day decisions about the project. In an agile team, the actual team themselves are making the decision. And so what's the team facilitator doing? Bringing them together, making sure they're working together, making sure they're collaborating. And again, an analogy I like to give is, think of a sports coach. What's the role of a sports coach? The role of a sports coach is to get the team ready for the game, right? They're working together. They get them engaged and motivated and psych them up and so on and so forth, right? Get ready for the game. Make sure they understand each of their strengths and weaknesses and so on and so forth. They're not actually telling the team members what to do once they're on the field. Once the team is on the pitch, once they're on the field, the team is the one that's going to be throwing the ball or kicking the ball and so on and so forth. They're the one that's doing the play, right? The coach is making sure that the team is ready for that game, right? So exactly the same kind of principle here. You've got the team facilitator making sure that the team is collaborating, encouraging that collaboration. Then you've got the product owner that I mentioned. They represent the customer, right? So they represent the business, the customer. So they are creating the product backlog, the prioritized list of user stories, and they're going to approve or reject the deliverable, right? The sprint review. Then you got the agile team, self-organizing team, developers and testers, business analysts, whoever is required. Small team. Agile team, they're always small teams. You don't have big, huge agile teams. Now, you might come across this term here, T-shaped skills, right? So you've got I-shaped skills, T-shaped skills. I-shaped skills means you have you have expertise in one technical area. T-shaped means you have expertise in one area, but then you can diversify in other areas, right? So, for example, you've got a developer that can also work as a tester, right? They can easily switch their skills to work as a tester, right? And moreover, you have technical skills, but plus you have management and leadership, collaborative skills, soft skills, and that is what is required in an agile team, right? You want the team to be working together. Then you have the agile coach, right? Normally the agile coach is the team facilitator, right? But, the team facilitator may bring an additional coach, and, that's just an optional role on a project. All right, now, the exam, right? Let me just briefly talk about this, very, very briefly. And I'm going to share my screen with you here, right? The exam itself, right, syllabus, right, is documented in the in what's known as the exam content outline, right? The exam content outline, or the ECO that you see here, right? That is the syllabus. Right. So our class and our video training is based off of this, right? The exam content outline. Now, there's 35 tasks. I'm just scrolling down here. There's 35 tasks that make up the syllabus. You don't need to necessarily know what all these tasks are, right? There's just a side note. On the left-hand side here, right, you see the principles, or the chapters, if you like, of PMBOK version 6, right? Now, you don't necessarily need to read or download PMBOK version 6, but this is just taken from page 25 of PMBOK version 6. And this is the format that we've created our videos, and the format that we've created our this class as well. So we're basically going to talk about integration next, and scope, and schedule, and cost, and so on and so forth, right? And so this is kind of like makes up a summary of PMI standards. The way PMI have their standards, got these process groups across the top: initiating, planning, executing, monitoring, controlling, and closing. You've got these knowledge areas down the side, and then you've got all these different processes, right? And these are the processes that make up the PMI standards. Now, PMI have PMBOK 6 and PMBOK 7. PMBOK version 7 is an add-on to version 6. It's not a replacement. It's an add-on to version 6. So the exam is actually covering principles of both 6 and 7. PMBOK 6, if you look, is about 900 pages. PMBOK 7 is only about 300 pages, right? So 7 is not meant to be a replacement of 6. It's an add-on to version 6, all right? And so our training videos and this class is basically taking the principles of, the version 6 and 7, and basically the exam content outline. Right, so the exam content outline is taking the principles of version 6, version 7, right, as well as some other resources as well. You don't necessarily need to read version 6 or version 7, right, to pass the exam. If you do have it, just use it as a reference. You don't necessarily need